I mean, it was that one small city-state of Medina, which is as big as the mosque right now, right? The actual covered and the paved area of the mosque in Medina that transformed the world, sent lights radiating from to the east and the western hemispheres. I don't see why we can't do that. With just one example, and we know for a fact. Even if you read, I'm going from the sublime to the profane now, so you read Tipping Point for what it's worth. I think it's pretty shallow, but he's making the same point there as well. That at the end of the day, it's just small groups that transform the world, and that is absolutely true. But we again recognize we're not doing the transformation, right? The message is very clear in the Quran that God does not change the condition of a people unless they change what is within themselves. But we have to know what we have to change. So if we change ourselves and we want to now not only maximize shareholder wealth, but also employee wealth, that's not going to cut it, right? So again, the emphasis should be on effort, and that effort has to be based on knowledge, and that knowledge has to be based on revelation. I mean, knowledge comes in two guises at least. That there is scriptural knowledge and there's non-scriptural knowledge, and I think the one of the distinguishing features about our civilization from others is that it's based on scriptural knowledge. Right? It's based on revelation. That doesn't mean we don't go and experiment on the terrestrial plane, but all our efforts are being guided by a unified vision. Okay, so we made advances in arithmetic, not for the sake of arithmetic or geometry, so that we could measure the Qibla with greater accuracy. That is what was driving us. So there's no contradiction between, say, material improvements in the terrestrial sphere and our dedication to the transcendental sphere. But the nature and direction, the articulation of the terrestrial, the worldly realm will alter and will be directed from above. So we'll come up with something very different. First of all, if you would ask faculty, should our students be more ethical? So at least they're recognizing that they're not behaving as ethically as they would like. And of course, if you were to ask them, what do you mean by ethics? They would give you, I'm pretty sure, different definitions. Now, while they're recognizing that, there doesn't seem to be much visible effort to make the change, right? So why is that not happening? Well, I think what it is that first of all, they're just the routines of life. You're working, well, faculty probably doesn't work that much, but when they do work, this is not at the top of the agenda. There is the concept of bounded rationality. And probably here it's even more true that the rationality is bounded even more stringently. There are certain things you focus on, there are other things you don't focus on. You're caught in the humdrum of life, in the hurly-burly of life. So you take care of things which are urgent, which have to be dealt with. If they're not dealt with now, you won't get the chance to deal with them later. But those urgent things never really disappear because work spans to fill the time available for its completion. So these people never really get the time to do something about things which are important, which have to be taken care of, such as trying to craft human beings who are more responsible. So that is one issue, being ensnared in the routines of daily life that do not give you much time to reflect on anything, ethics or otherwise. That you just have to keep working on the assembly line to keep the ship together. That's one explanation. The other explanation could also be a sense that maybe they also feel that they are caught in this big machine, and then there's maybe pessimism on their part of view, that there's no point talking about these issues, either because they perceive that the management committee will not give them much room. So they may have that perception, or the perception would be that the market would not be interested, and therefore we shouldn't worry about it. Or the other thing would be that while they would like them to be, and I think this is probably the main reason, I think they would like them to be more ethical. I don't think they're making the point that their products are actually toxic, or that they're working in companies which are psychopaths. I mean, that is the definitive conclusion of the literature in criminology, and that is the argument of the chief profiler for psychopaths for the FBI. Right? So you have this vast amount of literature which talks about the high rates of delinquency and criminality in the corporate community, unparalleled, unmatched anywhere else. I don't think they're aware of that. So it's a case of, yes, we are good, but we would like them to be better. When that's the case, I don't think they would really bother. They haven't really seen, haven't been exposed to the literature that shows the connections between corporations and things that as individual human beings they would find disturbing, such as the destruction of the environment, the sort of abusive and obscene poverty we see around us, the naked display of callousness and indifference. They see the connections between those phenomena and what they teach in their class, that you should, maximize your utility function, that self-interest is fantastic, it leads to all these benefits. So I think there is a case of just ignorance. So there's pessimism. So let's start with ignorance. So I think that's the main reason. The dots really haven't been connected. What are their backgrounds? The backgrounds are basically engineers who are teaching in management schools. I think that's true by and large. Right? Okay, then if they see the connections, at that point they see that it's a hopeless situation and not much can be done about it. Or they find some kind of rationalization. So this is, as George Orwell points out, they will give you the classic argument, well, if you want to make omelets, you got to break some eggs. And as George Orwell rightly would say to that, I want to see the omelet. I mean, we see these broken eggs, but we never see the damn omelet. That's the problem with this free market. Sure, it'll lead to higher inequality and the abuse of human dignity, but guess what? It'll all work out well in the end. Well, the end hasn't arrived. We haven't seen where it's worked out. Where it's worked out precisely, as Polanyi points out in The Great Transformation, is when the markets have to be regulated, have to be stopped, have to be brought into balance with other sectors. That is when things begin to function. So it's these set of factors that I think produce these results, and also that they themselves do not directly taste the bitterness of their own actions, right? So I mean, they're including myself, we're in reasonably affluent surroundings, and when some manager pollutes the river of Ravi because he's working in some textile and he's going to maximize profits by dumping effluents, following the example of Jack Welch and GE in the Hudson River, we don't have to drink the water of Ravi because we can buy, well, I don't want to bring the brand up, there's no point going free advertising because we should get paid for it. It just doesn't sink in. Okay. Alright, so they push for it. It's like this. So they're going to tell you guys, okay, privatization is great. Some of you guys will go work in the privatization commission. You'll privatize state assets. State revenues will drop. So services will be cut. Right? Yeah, you've got to cut something. So public education will suffer. No problem. We have parallel structures. We'll send our kids to private schooling. Health services will be cut. No problem. We'll have private doctors hospital, or some other place that can fleece us and murder us. This is a good outcome. By the way, you may want to take the reference of Doctor's Hospital out in case I don't get sued or you don't get sued. And I'm not referring to any particular doctor hospital. Okay? So it's a hospital of doctors in the private sector, and that's what I meant. Okay, at least that's what I now mean. Well, why would they bother with that? So it's not the issue is, even if they accept the fact that things are going downhill, since they're on the deck of the Titanic, their feet are not even yet wet. So at that point, when the water rises, and their feet started getting wet, and their children and their families started getting affected, at that point they will take notice, but then it will be too late. See, what Machiavelli points out in The Prince is that a disease is difficult to diagnose in the beginning, but it's easy to cure. In later stages, it's a no-brainer to identify the disease and to see it, but it's impossible to cure. That is the definition that I think every slave owner will agree with. Look, he's providing jobs to the slaves. If it weren't for him, the slaves would starve. So the slaves should be grateful for all the whips they get and for working. The problem with that is that that's assuming that that's the only option available. And we clearly know that that's not the only option available. And why should that be the standard on determining if something is socially justifiable? So, if you're running a mafia operation and you're smuggling drugs and you're giving crack, or take tobacco, so you're selling cigarettes to children. If you look at tobacco advertising, being criticized for that. Joe Camel was specifically targeted for young children. Get them when they're young and they'll stay with you till they grow old. So tobacco is providing fantastic jobs to the people. You all know that. If you look at PTC, it does a great job. Okay, but would anyone consider them to be socially responsible, given the health consequences of their actions? One would think not. So, if we go by that standard, then concentration camps or even prisons are socially responsible. They take care of the inmates. They give them 3 meals a day. But the question is then, why should this be the criteria defining responsibility? Why not issues of autonomy, freedom, creativity, independence, and in our opinion, the right and the ability to worship God as God chooses to be worshipped in all aspects of life. I think the starting point is that you have to, exactly the tobacco companies just use, and we use the right methodologies to get people when they're young. Instill in them that immunity that can protect them from this contamination of dunya, right? That's toxic. And I think that's perhaps one of the hikmah for the ulama, that the great ulama would teach very basic subjects to little children, whether it was tajweed or something. Because it's important to protect our children, and that's the future. And to then instill in them ilm, through which they can differentiate that which is true from that which is false, and therefore they will not fall into the errors and the pitfalls that unfortunately got our previous generations. So I think the work has to be done at the level of education, following the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and that's what he did. He started teaching people. And we need to teach exactly what he taught to bring about the same transformation that he brought about. And this is God's promise, that if you struggle in God's path, he will open up the paths for you. And that promise was true then. We saw it. We've seen it every single instance in our history, where when people took up God's promise, he delivered. This is absolutely true. It's unbroken. And we clearly see when that did happen, there was some grievous flaw at work in terms of adab. See, adab is, I think, and that is, according to Atas, I'm not that bright. So Atas is this Malaysian theologian, and I think he puts it well, that we are suffering from a crisis of adab. So we have to teach ourselves and our children adab. Now, what does adab mean? It doesn't mean superficial courtly manners. Adab means to put things in their proper place. So we need to put government in its proper place. We need to put the social sector in its proper place. We need to put business in its proper place. Business is extremely important and useful for certain things. Making shoes and shirts, fine. Give it to business, don't give it to government. But government is extremely crucial for other things. For example, dispensing justice. Would you want to have private sector judges, where you have these private sector courts, and you know, the more you can pay them, they deliver justice to you. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem to make any sense. So the problem is right now we are suffering from a crisis of adab, where we are not putting things in their proper place, and we need to put things in their proper place. And who defines what proper place is? Well, God. God being the most perfect, His evaluation is the most perfect, and He's given us the structure of adab on which to live our lives, you know, to deal with these issues. So that is where we have to turn, and that is what tawbah means, which is to turn. So we have to make tawbah. We have to turn back. We have to return, right, to the truth.
In terms of LUMS, that means changing the curriculum, or changing the pedagogy, or changing the way, you know, or bringing more awareness to the social issues and the discussions.
Well, I think that would be the starting point, at least at the most basic level, is to at least make people see through the mystifications, right? What is called necessary illusions, important oversimplifications. So it's in a way to start a process of disillusionment, because once they recognize that this is a type of magic, this is not